Operation Prometheus unfolded across 12 systems simultaneously. Human forces struck at Council military installations, supply depots, and communication hubs. These were not assaults meant to destroy but to disable, to distract, to pull Council forces away from their central command. In the Vega system, Captain Maria Torres led a squadron of destroyers in a lightning raid that crippled the Council's largest repair facility. In the Ross 128 system, Colonel Ahmed Rashid's ground forces seized a major weapons depot, then broadcast its inventory to show the galaxy how heavily armed the Council truly was. At Wolf 359, Commander David Park's infiltration team disabled the primary FTL communication relay, cutting off Council forces in an entire sector. Every action was timed perfectly. Every strike created maximum chaos with minimum casualties. Because this was not about winning battles. This was about creating an opening for the real operation. Admiral Okonkwo led the main fleet herself. 50 ships, everything humanity could spare without leaving Earth defenseless. They gathered at a staging point in deep space, far from any system, and prepared for a journey that most expected to be one way. Dr. Tanaka's intelligence was perfect. She had mapped every sensor platform, every patrol route, every automated defense between human space and Concordia Prime. More importantly, she had found the gaps. The Council had not updated their security in centuries. Why would they? No one had ever dared threaten their seat of power. The human fleet moved through those gaps like ghosts. They traveled in complete communication silence, their ships running cold. Only minimal power to life support and navigation. They used gravity slingshots around dead stars to avoid leaving FTL signatures. They drifted through Council space as if they were debris, lifeless and ignored. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of absolute discipline, of living in near darkness, of praying that every sensor reading showing a Council patrol was not about to turn toward them. Ships developed mechanical problems that could not be repaired without giving away their position. Crew members dealt with the stress of knowing they were deep in enemy territory, with no support and no escape route. But Okonkwo held them together through force of will and quiet confidence. She walked her flagship's corridors during sleep shifts, talking to frightened young officers and veteran crew members who had seen too much war. She reminded them what they were fighting for. Not conquest, not revenge, freedom, the right to exist without kneeling. On Earth, the remaining human forces prepared for what might come. If the operation failed, the Council would likely launch a final overwhelming assault. General Reeves positioned every remaining ship, every defense platform, every soldier. Earth would not fall without a fight that the galaxy would never forget. Luna's biodomes became shelters for Earth's children, evacuated against their parents' will. Governor Mbeki watched the starfields and waited, her jaw tight with tension. Mars fortified further, knowing they would be a primary target. Every human world prepared for either liberation or apocalypse. The human fleet reached Concordia Prime on the 87th day of Operation Prometheus. They emerged from the planet's shadow, their sudden appearance catching the orbital defenses completely unprepared. But Okonkwo did not order weapons fire. Instead, she ordered communications. Dr. Tanaka, operating from her station aboard the flagship, executed the most sophisticated hacking operation in human history. She had been preparing for this for months, using intelligence gathered from the captured Kurashi ship and years of patient infiltration. In 17 seconds, she took control of the Galactic Communication Network. Every screen on Concordia Prime suddenly displayed the human fleet. Every communication channel across Council space was overridden. And on every world in the galaxy, on every ship, on every station, the same broadcast began. Ambassador Chen Wei appeared on those screens. She stood not in the Council chamber, but in a simple room aboard Okonkwo's flagship. Her diplomatic clothes were gone, replaced by simple coveralls. She looked tired. She looked determined. And she looked free. "My name is Chen Wei," she began. "I am ambassador for humanity, and I speak now to every being in this galaxy who has wondered why the Galactic Council went to war against my species. I speak to those who have been told we are dangerous, aggressive, and uncivilized. I speak to you now with truth." The broadcast continued for 20 minutes. Chen presented everything. The data crystal's contents played out for all to see. The destruction of the Perseverance. The theft of human technology. the suppression of the Kelverics, Methandri, and Yule, the communications between council leaders discussing how to break humanity's spirit, the financial records showing corruption, the strategic plans revealing that humanity's ultimatum had been decided years before any justification existed. Most damning of all, Chen showed the council's own internal debates about which species to target next. A dozen emerging civilizations were on their list. The galaxy watched as council leaders coldly discussed which species showed too much potential, which ones needed to be limited, which ones could be useful servants. "This is not governance," Chen declared. "This is tyranny, and humanity's only crime was refusing to accept it. We did not start this war. We simply refused to surrender. And now we stand before the Council's seat of power not to destroy it but to expose it, to show every species in this galaxy what your leaders truly are." The broadcast ended. The galaxy reeled. On 1,000 worlds, populations who had believed the Council's propaganda suddenly questioned everything. Species who had been told humanity was the threat now saw the truth. And the Council's member species, many of whom had not known what their leaders did in their names, erupted into chaos. The Xalanth philosopher caste immediately convened emergency sessions. They had built their entire civilization on the pursuit of truth, and the Council had lied to them for centuries. Within 6 hours, the Xalanth government announced their withdrawal from the Council. They would not fight for leaders who had betrayed everything they claimed to represent. 3 suppressed species launched rebellions. The Kelverics, quarantined for 800 years, suddenly received broadcasts from sympathetic species offering support. The Methandri remnants, those who had retained some individuality despite Vexithari integration, began to resist. And throughout Council space, junior species who had always suspected something was wrong now demanded answers. The Council itself fractured. The Kurashi Hive consensus divided into 2 factions, one supporting the war and one calling for peace. The Vexithari Crystal Collective experienced the first major disagreement in their recorded history. Lesser member species began withdrawing their forces, unwilling to continue a war built on lies. On Concordia Prime, the High Archon Kethzar attempted to rally the remaining council members. They convened an emergency session, but their chambers were surrounded by human ships that made no hostile moves. Okankov simply waited in orbit, her fleet ready but not aggressive. Then the Vexithari made their final attempt. A battle fleet that had been defending Concordia Prime moved to engage the human forces, 300 ships against 50. But this time other species intervened. Xalanth vessels positioned themselves between the 2 fleets. Kurashi ships from the peace faction did the same. Even some Vexithari ships refused their orders. "Do not fire," Okanka ordered her fleet. "We are not here to fight. We are here to end the fighting." The standoff lasted 3 days. During that time, governments fell across council space. The Vexithari High Archon was removed from power by its own people, replaced by a reform faction. The Kurashi consensus finally unified around peace. The Xalanth offered to mediate negotiations. When the talking finally began, Ambassador Chen returned to the council chamber. But this time she did not stand alone. Admiral Okankov accompanied her, along with General Reeves, Dr. Tanaka, and representatives from the species the council had suppressed. And this time no one summoned them. They came as equals demanding accountability. The negotiations took weeks. The old council structure was dissolved. In its place, a new galactic assembly was proposed, with democratic principles and equal representation. Species sovereignty was guaranteed. No more would emerging civilizations be suppressed. No more would the powerful dictate terms to the weak. The Concordia Accords were signed on the 98th day after Operation Prometheus began. Humanity did not demand reparations or territory. They demanded only what they had fought for: freedom, the right to exist unbound, the right to say no. The war was over. Humanity had lost 3 colonies, 47 ships, and 83,000 people. Entire worlds bore the scars of bombardment. Families had been shattered, but they had survived, and they had won something far more valuable than military victory. They had won the right to be free. Admiral Okonkwo retired 6 months after the accords were signed. She was 58 years old and felt twice that. She moved to a small house on Luna, where she could see Earth rising above the horizon each day. Sometimes veterans came to visit, and she would listen to their stories, helping them process what they had endured. General Reeves did not retire. Instead, he founded the first multi-species military academy, teaching the next generation of defenders how to protect freedom without becoming tyrants themselves. The human dropships were ugly. That was Vexilla's first thought as she watched them descend through the atmosphere of Thessar 7th. They were blocky, heavily armored things that seemed to fly through sheer stubbornness rather than elegance. Compared to the sleek Coalition transport craft, they looked primitive and brutal. They were also absolutely covered in weapons. Vexilla stood in the observation deck of the forward command post, watching the landing zone through reinforced windows. The humans had cleared it themselves in less than 10 minutes. The craft that had occupied the area were simply gone, eliminated by weapons fire from the descending ships that was frankly excessive by Coalition standards. The first dropship touched down with a heavy thud that Vexilla felt through the deck plating. The rear ramp dropped and humans began pouring out. "By the stars," her tactical officer breathed beside her. The humans were bipedal, which was common enough in the galaxy, but there was something immediately different about them. They moved with a predatory grace, their heads swiveling to scan for threats even in a secured landing zone. They wore armored suits that seemed to add bulk to already solid frames. Each carried weapons that looked far too large for their body size. "They are so tall," the Valori tactical officer said, "and dense. Look at how they move in this gravity." Thesar 7 had gravity roughly 20% higher than Earth standard, according to the database. Most Coalition species found it uncomfortable. The humans seemed not to notice at all. More dropships landed, disgorging soldiers and equipment. Vexilla watched in fascination as the humans established a perimeter with military precision. They moved as units, covering each other, communicating through hand signals and short verbal commands. There was an efficiency to their movements that spoke of extensive training and experience. A human in slightly different armor approached the command post. Vexilla's translator indicated this was Major Sarah Reeves, the commanding officer of the human ground forces. Vexilla went to meet her, bringing her tactical officer as escort. The human removed her helmet as she approached, and Vexilla got her first clear look at a human face. It was oddly flat, with forward-facing eyes that immediately locked onto Vexilla's. Predator eyes. Eyes designed to track prey and judge distances for striking. Vexilla suppressed an instinctive flutter of concern. "Commander Vexilla," the human said, and her voice was deeper than expected. "Major Sarah Reeves, 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force. My people are ready for briefing and deployment." "Major Reeves," Vexilla replied, her translator converting her harmonic speech to human language. "We are grateful for your rapid response. The tactical situation is dire. The Krath have overrun 70% of the mining colony and are pressing toward the main facilities." "Understood. How many Krath are we facing?" "Current estimates suggest between 50,000 and 80,000 individual warriors in the immediate area. Possibly more in reserve." Vexilla watched the human's face carefully for a reaction. 5,000 humans against 50,000 Krath. The odds were terrible, but Major Reeves simply nodded. "Those are acceptable numbers for the force we brought," she said calmly. "What can you tell me about Krath combat tactics?" "Acceptable numbers?" Vexilla's crystalline body flickered with confusion, but she pushed forward with the briefing. "The Krath attack in waves, showing no concern for casualties. They are heavily armored, fast, and fight in close quarters. Their mandibles can cut through most materials. They are also highly resistant to standard energy weapons. Kinetic weapons effectiveness? Moderate. They have thick carapaces, multiple hits required for individual targets. Perfect. We prefer kinetic weapons anyway." Major Reeves pulled up a holographic display from her wrist unit. "I need detailed maps of the colony, locations of your remaining forces, and any areas you absolutely need held." As they discussed the tactical situation, more humans arrived for the briefing. Vexilla noticed they were all watching her and her staff with open curiosity, but also with a relaxed readiness that suggested they could go from calm to combat in an instant. It was unnerving. One of the human soldiers, a younger male according to the name tape reading Torres, was staring at the Valori tactical officer with wide eyes. The Valori shifted uncomfortably under the attention. "Is something wrong?" the Valori asked nervously. "Sorry," Torres said, and his face changed color slightly. What Vexilla's database said was called blushing. "It's just, you look like a really big cat." That's an Earth animal. They're fluffy and we keep them as pets and companions. The Valori's ears went flat. I am not a pet. No, Torres said quickly, raising his hands. I meant it as a compliment. Cats are great. We love cats, Major Reeves cut in sharply. Torres, focus. Yes, ma'am. The briefing continued, but Vexilla found herself increasingly puzzled by human behavior. They asked detailed questions about enemy capabilities but seemed unconcerned about the odds. They discussed tactics involving close combat, as if it were perfectly normal to fight massive insectoid monsters at arm's length. Most confusing of all, they kept pulling out small packages and consuming something they called energy bars that smelled vaguely toxic. Major Reeves, Vexilla said carefully, I must ask. Your soldiers seem very confident. Have humans fought insectoid species before? Not exactly like the Krath, but we've fought in similar conditions. High-intensity combat against numerically superior forces in hostile environments. It's what Marines train for. And you believe 5,000 soldiers is sufficient? Reeves smiled, and again Vexilla saw those very white teeth. Commander, humans come from a world where everything is trying to kill us. The weather, the animals, the plants, sometimes even the terrain itself. We evolved to be survivors. More than that, we evolved to be winners. She gestured to the landing zone where thousands of humans were organizing with mechanical efficiency. Every one of these Marines has trained in conditions that would kill most coalition species. They've endured heat, cold, toxic environments, and high-gravity combat simulation. They've been pushed to their physical and mental limits and then pushed further. But the Krath are dangerous. Yes, I read the reports. Reeves' expression became more serious. Commander, I'm not going to lie to you. We're going to take casualties. Some of my people aren't going home. But we will hold this colony. That's what Deathworlders do, Deathworlders. There was that word again. I pulled up Earth's classification before we arrived, Vexilla admitted. Class 12 in all categories. I confess I do not fully understand what that means in practical terms. It means we're hard to kill, Reeves said simply. It means we have redundant organs, efficient oxygen processing, and an immune system that treats most galactic pathogens as minor nuisances. It means our bones are dense, our muscles are strong, and our brains are wired to keep fighting even when logic says we should quit. She looked directly at Vexilla with those predator eyes. It means you asked for reinforcements, and what you got was 5,000 people who literally don't know how to give up. An alert sounded on Vexilla's communicator. The Krath were launching another assault, this time toward the human landing zones. Looks like we get to introduce ourselves properly, Reeves said, putting her helmet back on. With your permission, Commander, I'm taking my people into the field. Permission granted. Good luck, Major. We don't need luck, Commander. We're human. Vexilla watched as the humans deployed with remarkable speed. Within minutes, they had moved from organized landing zones to defensive positions facing the oncoming Krath. The first wave of insects crested a ridge. Thousands of them, mandibles clicking in anticipation. The humans opened fire. The sound was deafening. Human weapons used chemical propellants, creating thunder with each shot. Tracer rounds lit up the darkening sky like deadly fireflies. The Krath wave crashed into the human lines like water against rock, and broke. Vexilla watched in stunned silence as the humans held ground that should have been overrun in seconds. They fought with a ferocity that matched the Krath's own, giving no ground, showing no fear. When Krath broke through the firing lines, humans met them with bladed weapons and physical combat that seemed suicidal but somehow worked. They are fighting like the Krath, her tactical officer whispered. No, Vexilla said, understanding dawning. The Krath fight like mindless insects. The humans fight like humans. That is far more terrifying. Private First Class Marcus Torres had been in combat before, but never against alien insects the size of trucks. He crouched behind a reinforced barrier, his rifle hot from sustained fire, and watched another wave of Krath surge toward his position. Reload, Sergeant Price shouted from somewhere to his left. Conserve your ammunition and pick your targets. Torres ejected his spent magazine and slammed a fresh one home. The movement was automatic, drilled into him through thousands of hours of training. Around him, his squad maintained a steady rate of fire, each shot carefully aimed at the gaps in Krath armor. The Coalition had been right about one thing. These bugs were tough. But Marines were tougher. A Krath warrior broke through the line to his right. It was massive, easily 3 meters tall with mandibles that dripped something corrosive. One of the coalition observers screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure terror. The Krath turned toward the sound. Torres didn't think. He just moved. He vaulted the barrier, sprinting at the Krath with his combat knife drawn. The insect turned to face him, mandibles spread wide. Torres slid under the strike, using his momentum to carry him past the snapping jaws. As he passed, he drove his knife up into the softer armor at the Krath's neck joint and pulled the trigger on his rifle one-handed. The Krath collapsed. Torres rolled to his feet, breathing hard. "Torres, get back in position," Price yelled. "On it, Sergeant." He sprinted back to the barrier, diving over it just as another Krath reached his previous position. Corporal Jackson, the squad's heavy weapons specialist, took the creature down with a sustained burst from her machine gun. "Show off," Jackson muttered at Torres. "Just doing my job," Torres replied, checking his rifle. The battle had been going on for 3 hours now. 3 hours of sustained combat that would have exhausted most coalition species to the point of collapse. Torres was tired, sure, and his arms ached from the constant recoil of his weapon, but he could keep going. Every Marine could keep going. That was the whole point of training. Push yourself until you think you can't continue, then push further. "Second wave incoming," someone shouted. Torres looked up and saw what had to be thousands more Krath pouring over the ridge. It was like watching a living tide of chitin and death. His rational brain told him the odds were impossible. There were just too many of them. His Marine brain told his rational brain to shut up and keep fighting. The human line adjusted. Heavier weapons were brought to bear. Automatic grenade launchers began pumping rounds into the Krath mass, each explosion scattering insect bodies like leaves in a storm. Artillery that had been positioned behind the lines opened up, creating a rolling barrage that turned the landscape into a hellscape of fire and shrapnel. And still the Krath came. "Fix bayonets," Price ordered. Torres attached the long blade to his rifle without question. If the Krath got to melee range, they would use every tool available. That was human doctrine. Adapt and overcome. The Krath hit the line like a tsunami. Torres fired until his rifle clicked empty, then used it as a club. A Krath mandible scraped across his armor, leaving a deep gouge but not penetrating. He reversed his rifle and drove the bayonet into the creature's eye. It shrieked, a sound like metal tearing, and fell away. Another took its place immediately. Torres kicked it back, loaded a fresh magazine, and fired point blank. The Krath's head exploded in a spray of blue-green fluid. Beside him, Jackson was using her machine gun like a battering ram, the hot barrel leaving burns on Krath carapaces. Another Marine, Private Chen, had lost his rifle and was fighting with just his knife and sidearm, moving with a fluid grace that would have looked beautiful if it wasn't so violent. This was what coalition species didn't understand about humans. They saw the violence and thought it was mindless aggression. They didn't understand that every move was calculated, every action was trained. Humans had spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. It was in their blood, in their culture, in the very structure of their brains. They were persistence hunters who had learned to hunt each other, then learned to hunt together. Apex predators who had become apex cooperators. It made them terrifyingly effective in combat. Torres left side. "We've got coalition troops pinned down." Torres looked where Price was pointing. About 50 meters away, a group of coalition soldiers was trapped behind a collapsed building. They were from one of the species Torres didn't recognize yet, floating creatures that shimmered like heat waves. The Krath were closing in on their position. "Third squad with me," Price ordered. "We're getting them out." 10 Marines broke from the defensive line and charged toward the trapped coalition troops. It was insane. It was exactly the kind of thing that should have gotten them all killed. But humans had a rule that was drilled into every soldier from day one: never leave anyone behind. Torres ran through hell. Krath came at him from all sides. He fired, reloaded, fired again. A Krath claw caught his shoulder, spinning him around. He used the momentum to bring his rifle up and take the creature's head off. Another Marine grabbed him and pulled him forward. They reached the coalition troops. Price immediately started organizing a fighting retreat. "Fall back to our lines. We'll cover you." The shimming aliens looked at the humans with something Torres thought might be gratitude or terror or both. They began moving slowly, clearly exhausted. "Move faster," Torres shouted, then realized they couldn't. They were already at their physical limits. "Jackson, Torres, carry them," Price ordered. Torres grabbed one of the aliens. It was surprisingly light, almost weightless. He tucked it under one arm and kept his rifle in the other hand. Jackson did the same with another one. The retreat was a nightmare. The Krath pressed from all sides, sensing vulnerable prey. The Marines formed a moving barrier, constantly firing, constantly moving. 2 went down. Price grabbed one and dragged him along. Another Marine grabbed the second. Never leave anyone behind. They made it back to the human lines. Torres set down the coalition soldier he had been carrying and immediately returned to his position. His shoulder hurt where the Krath had hit him. His legs burned with fatigue. His ears rang from the constant gunfire. He raised his rifle and kept fighting. The battle lasted another 4 hours before the Krath finally pulled back. When it was over, Torres sat with his back against the barrier, breathing hard. Around him, other Marines were checking equipment, treating minor wounds, and drinking water. The coalition troops they had saved were staring at them with expressions Torres couldn't quite read. One of the shimmering aliens floated closer. "You saved us," it said through a translator. "That's what we do," Torres replied, "but why?" "You do not know us. We are not your people." Torres thought about that for a moment. "You're coalition, right? That makes you our people. Besides, we're human. Protecting others is kind of our thing." The alien floated there in silence for a long moment. Then it made a gesture Torres's database identified as profound respect. "You are all insane," it said. "Yeah," Torres agreed, grinning. "We get that a lot." Sergeant Price appeared, looking tired but satisfied. "Good work today, Marines. Command says we held the line. Krath casualties are estimated at 15,000. Our casualties are 32 wounded, 5 critical. 0 dead, 0 dead. In a battle against 15,000 enemies." Torres allowed himself a moment of pride. "That was one hell of a kill ratio. Get some food and rest," Price continued. "We move out in 4 hours to push them back further. 4 hours of rest after 7 hours of intense combat. Most species would need days to recover. Marines would be ready to go again in 4 hours. That was the difference between a Deathworld species and everyone else." Torres pulled out an energy bar and took a bite. Across from him, one of the coalition observers was watching with fascination. "What is that?" the alien asked. "Food," Torres replied. "It smells toxic. It's got capsaicin in it. That's a chemical compound from a plant on Earth. Burns a little going down." "You eat poison for pleasure?" Torres laughed. "Buddy, where we come from, that's not even close to the weirdest thing we eat. Humans consume all kinds of stuff that's toxic to other species. Caffeine, alcohol, capsaicin. Hell, chocolate is poisonous to most Earth animals, but we love it." The alien made a sound that might have been disbelief or horror. "Welcome to humanity," Torres said, taking another bite of his energy bar. "We're the species that looked at deadly plants and decided to use them as seasoning." Commander Vexilla walked through the human encampment with a growing sense of unreality. Everything about these beings challenged what she thought she knew about life in the galaxy. The first thing that struck her was the fire. The humans had built actual fires throughout their camp. Controlled flames that they sat around, cooked food over, and seemed to find comforting. Most coalition species had an instinctive fear of open flames. Fire meant danger, destruction, and death. The humans treated it like an old friend. A group of Marines sat around one such fire, and Vexilla approached cautiously. They looked up as she neared, and several smiled. She was getting better at reading human expressions. Smiles could mean many things, but these seemed genuine and welcoming. "Commander," one of them said, standing. It was Private Torres, the young human who had saved coalition troops earlier. "Want to join us?" "We're just swapping stories." "Swapping stories?" Vexilla asked. "Telling each other about things that happened to us. It's a human tradition. Helps us relax after combat." Vexilla settled near the fire, keeping what she hoped was a respectful distance from the flames. The humans shifted to make room for her without hesitation. That was another thing she had noticed. Humans seemed to automatically include others in their groups. It was a strong pack-bonding instinct. "So, Commander," Torres said, "what do you think of your first real look at human Marines in action?" "I think," Vexilla said carefully, "that I'm very glad you are our allies and not our enemies." The humans laughed at that, a sound that rumbled in the air. "You fought for 7 hours straight," Vexilla continued. "Most coalition soldiers would need medical intervention after 3. How is this possible?" "Endurance," another Marine explained. She introduced herself as Corporal Jackson. "Humans are endurance specialists. Back on Earth, our ancestors used to hunt prey by literally chasing them until they collapsed from exhaustion. We can't run as fast as most animals, but we can run longer. We sweat to cool down, which is super efficient. We can keep going when other species have to stop. But the violence, Vexilla said. You fought the Krath at close range. You used physical combat. This is not normal behavior for intelligent species. It's normal for us, Torres said. Commander, can I ask you something? What's the most dangerous animal on your homeworld? Vexilla considered. The thorncrawler, I suppose. It is a small creature with a painful sting. Right. On Earth, we have animals that can kill a human in seconds. We have bears that weigh 800 kilograms and can crush skulls with their paws. We have big cats that can drag prey twice their size up trees. We have crocodiles that have barely changed in millions of years because they're already perfect killing machines. We have sharks, venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, and plants that can cause agonizing death with a touch. This sounds like a nightmare world, Vexilla said. It's home, Torres replied with a shrug. And that's just the animals. We also have hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, droughts, floods, and temperature ranges that swing from way below freezing to hot enough to cook meat. Evolution on Earth wasn't about being the strongest or fastest. It was about being too stubborn to die. Jackson leaned forward. The thing is, Commander, humans aren't just survivors. We're problem solvers. When faced with a predator stronger than us, we didn't just run. We made weapons. When faced with harsh environments, we didn't just endure them. We built shelters, made clothing, and controlled fire. We took the worst planet in the galaxy and made it ours. And then, Torres added, we started fighting each other. For 10,000 years, humans have been perfecting warfare. We fought over territory, resources, ideas, and sometimes just because we were bored. We learned tactics, strategy, and technology. Wars in our history, our culture, our stories. It's not something we're proud of, but it made us very good at fighting when we need to. Vexilla felt her crystalline structure flicker with understanding. So when we asked for military aid, we were asking a species that has been at war with itself for its entire history. Pretty much, Jackson confirmed. But here's the important part. We also learned how to make peace. We learned that cooperation is stronger than conflict. We learned to fight together instead of against each other. That's why we came when you called. You're part of our coalition now. That makes you our people. And humans protect their people. A medical officer approached the fire. Commander Vexilla? I was asked to give you the casualty report from today's engagement. Proceed, Vexilla said. Human forces, 32 wounded, all expected to make full recovery. 5 in critical condition but stable. 0 fatalities. 0, Vexilla repeated. In 7 hours of intense combat against overwhelming numbers. 0 deaths. We're hard to kill, Torres said simply. Redundant organs, efficient healing, aggressive immune systems. You can blow a hole in a human, and as long as you miss the brain and heart, we'll probably survive long enough to get medical treatment. Even then, we've had people survive brain injuries that should have been fatal. I visited your medical facility earlier, Vexilla admitted. I saw wounded humans. They were laughing, making jokes. One was asking when he could return to combat. His leg was severely damaged. That's just how we deal with pain, Jackson explained. Humor helps. Distraction helps. Our brains release chemicals during stress that help us manage pain and fear. It's called an adrenaline response, makes us stronger and faster in the short term. Your species evolves temporary combat enhancements as a stress response? Vexilla asked in disbelief. Yep, it's pretty useful in a fight. A new voice joined the conversation. Major Reeves had approached the fire. Mind if I join? Ma'am, the Marine said, making room. Reeves sat down and looked at Vexilla. I understand you have questions about human combat capabilities, Commander. Many questions, Vexilla admitted. I am trying to understand how your species functions. Everything about you contradicts what I know about intelligent life. We're not that different from other species, Reeves said. We feel fear, pain, and exhaustion just like everyone else. The difference is what we do with those feelings. Most species evolved on worlds where cooperation meant survival. For humans, competition and conflict were equally important. We had to fight the environment and each other. It made us adaptable. And violent, Vexilla added. Sometimes, yes, Reeves acknowledged. But violence isn't the core of who we are. Protection is. Humans have a strong instinct to protect those we consider part of our group. It's why we fight so hard. Not because we love violence, but because we love what we're protecting. An alert sounded on Vexilla's communicator. She checked it and felt her structure go cold. Intelligence reports indicate the Krath are gathering for a major assault. They are bringing everything they have remaining. Over 200,000 warriors. The humans around the fire looked at each other. Vexilla expected to see fear or concern. Instead, she saw determination. 200,000, Torres said thoughtfully. That's about 40-to-1 odds. Give or take, Jackson agreed. Well, Torres said, standing up and stretching, I guess we better get ready. The other Marines stood as well, checking equipment with practiced ease. They moved with purpose but without panic. They were preparing for a battle that might kill them all, and they were treating it like just another day at work. You are not afraid? Vexilla asked. Torres looked at her with those predator eyes. Commander, of course we're afraid. Fear is a natural response to danger. But being afraid doesn't mean giving up. It means fighting anyway. That's what courage is. That's what humanity is. Major Reeves stood as well. Commander, I won't lie to you. Tomorrow's battle will be the hardest fight we've faced. We may not all make it, but we will hold this colony. That's not confidence or bravado. That's simple fact. Because humanity has never learned how to quit. I do not understand, Vexilla said. How can you be certain? Because, Reeves said simply, we're Deathworlders. Our entire evolution has been one long exercise in refusing to die. You can't intimidate us with numbers. You can't scare us with danger. Earth tried to kill us for millions of years and failed. We're not going to let some insect succeed where an entire planet couldn't. She looked at the assembled Marines, then back at Vexilla. Get some rest, Commander. Tomorrow we're going to show the Krath why you don't mess with humans, and more importantly why you don't mess with human friends. As Vexilla left the human camp, she looked back at the fires burning in the darkness. The humans were preparing for what might be their last battle, and they were doing it with determination, humor, and an absolute refusal to surrender. For the first time since the Krath invasion began, Vexilla felt something she had not felt in weeks. She felt hope. The Krath came at dawn. They covered the landscape like a living carpet. 200,000 strong, their mandibles clicking in unison to create a sound like continuous thunder. From the command post, Commander Vexilla watched the enemy advance and felt her earlier hope waver. Major Reeves stood beside her, looking through tactical binoculars at the approaching swarm. That's a lot of bugs, she said calmly. Coalition Command has authorized evacuation, Vexilla said. We can begin pulling out personnel. The colony can be reclaimed later. No. Vexilla turned to face the human. Major, I appreciate your determination, but we are facing overwhelming odds. We cannot possibly— yes we can, Reeves interrupted. And we will. Commander, with respect, your people don't understand what humans can do when we're properly motivated. This colony is important. The people here are important. We're not leaving. Then we will all die. Maybe, maybe not. But we're going to try something first. Reeves activated her communication system. All units, this is Reeves. Execute Plan Terra. I repeat, execute Plan Terra. What is Plan Terra? Vexilla asked. Reeves smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. It's what we call turning the battlefield into a death world. If the Krath want to fight humans, they're going to fight us on our terms, in conditions we're comfortable with, and they're not. Orders went out across the human forces. Vexilla watched in confusion as the Marines began implementing changes to the battlefield environment. They activated industrial equipment from the mining colony, flooding certain areas with chemical runoff that was toxic, but that human filters could handle. They overloaded heating systems in some sectors and cooling systems in others, creating temperature extremes. They even manipulated the atmosphere processors to increase local gravity in certain zones. You are making the environment more dangerous, Vexilla said in disbelief. For them, yes. For us, it's just a normal Tuesday on Earth, Reeves replied. The Krath evolved on a stable world, just like most coalition species. They're adapted for consistent conditions. Humans are adapted for chaos. We're going to give them chaos. Private Torres and his squad were positioned at a key choke point, a narrow canyon that the Krath would have to pass through to reach the main colony facilities. The temperature in the canyon had been raised to nearly 50 degrees Celsius. Torres was sweating inside his armor, but he could function. The Krath, when they entered the superheated canyon, would be sluggish. Here they come, Sergeant Price said. The first wave of Krath entered the canyon and immediately began to slow. The heat was affecting them, making their movements less coordinated. The Marines opened fire with precision, each shot counting, but there were so many. For every Krath that fell, 10 more took its place. The sheer mass of bodies began to overwhelm the defensive positions through pure numbers. "Fall back to secondary positions," Price ordered. The Marines retreated in good order, fighting all the way. They triggered pre-placed charges as they went, collapsing sections of the canyon and burying hundreds of Krath. But the swarm kept coming. Torres's squad reached the secondary defensive line and immediately began firing again. His rifle was so hot that the barrel was smoking. His ammunition was running low. All around him, other Marines were in similar situations. They were fighting at the very edge of their capabilities, and it still might not be enough. "Torres left side," Jackson shouted. He turned and saw a group of Krath had flanked their position. They were cut off. He looked at his squad mates and saw grim determination on every face. "Well," he said, loading his last magazine, "guess we do this the hard way." "Bayonets," Price said. They fixed bayonets the Krath charged. The Marines met them head-on. What followed was brutal, desperate combat. Torres fought with his rifle, his knife, and finally his bare hands when his weapons were lost. He felt Krath mandibles scrape across his armor, felt the impact of bodies slamming into him, felt his own fists breaking against insect carapaces. And then he heard the sound of engines. Reinforcements arrived. Not from the Coalition, but from other human units. Marines from different companies crashed into the Krath flank, scattering them. Torres found himself being pulled to his feet by Corporal Jackson. "Still alive?" she asked. "Unfortunately," he gasped. "Lost my rifle." "Here." She handed him a spare. "Now let's finish this." At the main defensive line, Major Reeves was coordinating the overall battle. The Krath were pressing hard, but the environmental modifications were working. The insects were fighting on a death world now, and they were not adapted for it. Commander Vexilla had chosen to remain at the command post, coordinating Coalition forces. She watched as the humans fought with a determination that defied logic. They should have broken by now. Any other species would have broken. But the humans kept fighting. "Major," she said, "your casualties are mounting." "I know," Reeves replied tightly, "but we're still in this fight." A new alert appeared on the tactical display. A massive concentration of Krath was moving toward a position held by only 20 Marines. They would be overwhelmed in minutes. "I'm rerouting forces," Reeves said, but Vexilla could see there were no forces available. "Everyone was already engaged. Let me go," Vexilla said suddenly. "Commander, I have a small force of Coalition troops in reserve. We are not fighters like your people, but we can help. We have watched humans fight for us. Now let us fight beside you." Reeves looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Go, and Commander?" "Thank you." Vexilla gathered her small force, a mix of different Coalition species, all volunteers. They were not trained for this kind of combat. They were scientists, engineers, and administrators, but they had watched the humans, seen their determination, and learned something about courage. They reached the embattled Marine position just as the Krath were about to overrun it. The Coalition troops opened fire with whatever weapons they had. Their shots were not as accurate as the Marines, their tactics not as refined, but they fought. They fought because the humans had taught them that protecting others was worth any cost. The Marines, seeing unexpected reinforcements, rallied. Together, humans and Coalition troops held the line. Across the battlefield, similar scenes were playing out. The humans were not just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for everyone. And their example was inspiring others to fight as well. The battle raged for 6 more hours. It was brutal, exhausting, and seemed endless. But gradually, impossibly, the tide began to turn. The Krath were taking unsustainable casualties. The modifications to the environment were hampering their coordination, and the humans simply refused to break. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, the Krath began to retreat. It started as a trickle, then became a flood. The hive mind had made a decision. These Deathworlders were apex predators. This battlefield was too dangerous. The cost was too high. The humans had won. Torres sat on a piece of rubble, his armor scarred and dented, his body aching in places he didn't know could ache. Around him, other Marines were in similar states. They had held. Against odds that should have been impossible, they had held. A small figure approached him. It was Pipri, the young Valori technician he had met earlier. She looked at him with wide eyes. "You are all insane," she said. Torres laughed, a sound that came out more like a wheeze. "Yeah, we established that already. But you won. You actually won. That's what we do. How do you live like this?" Pipri asked. So much danger, so much fighting. How do you exist in a universe that seems designed to kill you? Torres thought about that as he looked around at the battlefield, at the damage, at the cost. Then he looked at the colony facilities behind them, intact and safe. He looked at the coalition troops who had fought beside them, tired but alive. "We don't know any other way," he said finally. "But now you don't have to face it alone." That's what the coalition is about, right? Different species helping each other. We're good at fighting. You're good at other things. Together we're stronger. In the command post, Vexilla was compiling the final casualty reports. Human losses were significant. 87 wounded, 23 critically, but incredibly, impossibly, only 3 dead. 3 deaths out of 5,000 Marines in a battle against 200,000 enemies. How? She asked Reeves, who was reviewing the same reports. "Training, tactics, and pure human stubbornness," Reeves said. "We're built to survive. It's our greatest strength." "No," Vexilla said. "Your greatest strength is not survival. It is protection. You came when we called. You fought for people you barely knew. You inspired others to find courage they did not know they had. That is your true strength." Reeves was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Commander. That means a lot." Later, as Vexilla prepared her official report to Coalition Command, she chose her words carefully. The galaxy needed to understand what had happened here. Not just the military victory, but something more important. She wrote, "We requested reinforcements. What we received were Deathworlders. They came from a world that tried to kill them for millions of years. They evolved to survive in conditions that would eliminate most species. They learned to fight from necessity and perfected it through long practice." She paused, considering her next words. "But survival and combat capability are not what define humanity. What defines them is their capacity for protection, for cooperation, for refusing to abandon those who need.